Hey guys, welcome back to SUP'S Garage. If you're thinking about pro-charging your Camaro SS, on this video, I'm going to show you how to install it. I'll be going over the steps as close as I can as possible, and if for some reason I decide to do something outside the manual, I'll definitely mention it during the video. ProCharger I decided to go with is the P1X, and when ordering your ProCharger, you do have an option depending on which one you go with to get the Stage 2 Intercooler, which is what I decided to go with as well. And the exact part number for the ProCharger kit I bought is right here below. And it will also be down on the description in case you decide to buy this exact same ProCharger kit for your Camaro. And there are many options ProCharger offers as far as the ProCharger itself and again the intercooler that you decide to pick. And I do want to mention that my Camaro is a 6-speed, not an automatic. And just to be clear, you do have to change your spark plugs, which is this part number here, and I've already got that out of the way on my Camaro. And you're also going to need some coolant because we're going to be draining the coolant out to get to certain parts of the coolant system behind the bumper. First thing we want to start off doing is getting the tuning part out of the way because we're going to have to get the stock tuning out of the Camaro. And within a day or two, they should be sending you back their custom tuning to install in your Camaro. Because I did not purchase the tuner kit. On the tuner kit, once you install the ProCharger, you're gonna have to get it custom tuned by a performance shop nearby in your area. I didn't want to go through all that, so that's why I decided to go with this kit where I can do everything on my own. So let's go ahead and get the tuning part out of the way. All right, now that that's out of the way, first thing we got to start off is removing the air filter system. I already removed mine because I no longer had the stock air filter, so it'd be pointless for me to show you how to remove the stock one if I had an aftermarket. Currently had the RotoFab, and once you go ProCharger, obviously you're not going to be able to use that anymore. But that's pretty simple. It's just held down by these 3 grommets, the air filter box itself, and the rest is just the stock tubing. So just be sure you remove all that out of the way first, and then you can start the process on removing the bumper. We're going to start off by removing both front wheels. Then we're going to go ahead and remove these 8 screws that are holding the top of the bumper, along with 2 clips, as you can see here in the corner, and the other one on the passenger side, and then we can move on to the other parts of the bumper. All right, so once you remove all the bolts and the clip on the side, you just pull up gently, and this comes in 2 pieces. There's 1 piece there removed, and then we can pull on the other side gently. Okay, so as far as the bottom of the bumper goes, not too sure if I'm gonna be able to get it real clear on camera, so this is as close as I can get. But we're gonna have to get this splash shield out of the way. Once you get all the bolts surrounding the splash shield off, then we're gonna continue on the outer side of the bumper and remove the rest of the bolts that are attaching the bumper to the car. All right, so once you remove all the bolts for that plastic splash shield, you're just gonna pull back, and it comes right off. Now just continue removing the side bolts that are still holding the bumper from the bottom. Okay, next we're gonna go on the driver's side. We gotta remove 4 bolts. 1, 2, 3, and the top one's inside. You're gonna do this exact same thing for the passenger side. All right, once you get those bolts off, just carefully pull this back. Once you pulled it back, you got 3 more bolts that you're gonna have to get from the bottom. 1, 2, and 3 that are holding the bumper onto the fender. And again, you're gonna do the same thing on the passenger side. Okay, so once you get those 3 bolts removed, this plastic piece is just gonna be loose. Just put it aside for now, because when we reinstall the bumper, we're gonna have to put this back in there. Now on the driver's side only, we're gonna have to disconnect the accessories that are connected to the bumper. You're just gonna pull back on that red tab, then you're just gonna push down where that tab was, and this should simply just pull off. And also you're gonna disconnect this little clip here, supposed to sit right in that hole there. Just use some needle nose to pull it off and pull it out and pull it aside. All right, so once you've done all that, we got 4 more bolts we got to remove to get this front bumper off. As you can see, there were 2 on the bottom, which I have already removed. There was 1 there and there was 1 up there, but the other 2 are going to be even higher up. As you can see, that one there and then that one on top. Once you get all 4 of those bolts removed, and the same for the passenger side, we should then be able to remove this front bumper. All right, so once you get all those bolts removed, then we can finally remove the bumper. Just remove it slowly and be sure not to drop it because you don't want to mess up any of your paint. Just be very patient with it. All right, now that we got that out of the way, we got to remove this top piece here, and it's followed by 4 bolts in total. 1, 2, 3, 4 that we have to remove to get this out of the way. Okay, so for some reason this part is not on the manual, but there is this plastic clip that we do have to remove to continue to remove it completely off the car. And it is only for the passenger side. The driver's side, there's no clip to remove at all. Okay, so next we're gonna start by removing these 3 clips. You should be able to use a flathead screwdriver, and then you're gonna do the exact same thing on the passenger side. Okay, next on the driver's side, the air duct for the radiator, we're gonna go ahead and remove the clips that are holding this down. Now in the manual it says 5 total, but so far I could only count 4. We got 2 in the bottom, 1, 2, 3 on the top, and the 4th one on the outside. Again, I can't see the 5th one, but as I go and I remove these, I'll show you where the last one's at. All right, so I was able to find the last clip, and that clip's gonna be located on the very top, as you can see right there where my finger's pointing at. Now, obviously there's no way to get to that at this point, so I'm gonna go ahead and skip on to the part where we gotta remove the headlight, and then I'm pretty sure then we'll have full access to that last clip. And to remove the driver's side headlight, there's gonna be a total of 4 bolts we gotta remove. 1 on the left side, 1 on the right side, and then going towards the bottom, you got another one right here, and the last one right here on the very bottom. And once you get all 4 bolts removed, then we're gonna pull on this headlight slowly, then disconnect the harness that's connected to it, and then we can get this headlight out the way. Okay, so once you remove the headlight, there's only 2 connections that you're gonna have to disconnect from it. This one here, and you're gonna have to remove this plastic clip if yours still has it. Just use a screwdriver to pry it back to avoid cutting the zip tie. And then on the right side, there's another connector just like the ones we've been taking off before. You're gonna pull back on this red tab first, then push down on this tab and pull back. All right, now we're gonna remove the headlight shroud. We got 3 clips we're gonna have to remove. 1 here, and the last one is up top. After that, we should have access to the last clip to remove this radiator air duct. All right, so I already removed all 3 clips on the shroud, but as I was pulling up, there was something else still holding it. This clip's not mentioned on the manual, but it's pretty simple. Just put a screwdriver underneath and pry up and just pull it off the shroud itself, and then we can get the shroud out of the way. Okay, so as far as that last clip goes, even by removing everything, headlight and the headlight shroud, you still don't have access or visibility from the top view on that last plastic clip. So I found what you can use is a very long flathead screwdriver, and that's probably gonna be the best way to remove that clip. And of course, once you remove that last clip, then you should be able to get this radiator scoop out. All right, next we're gonna remove this plastic piece here, right next to the passenger headlight. And this piece here is held down by 3 clips, 1 on top, 1 on the bottom, and the other one's gonna be hidden behind this piece here, as you can see back there. Okay, so once you get those clips removed, simply just pull it out the way. Okay, now we're gonna remove the same piece on the driver's side, and it's gonna have 3 clips as well. 1 on top, 1 on the bottom, and the last one's gonna be right here. We're gonna go ahead and remove this air duct as well, and it's only held by 1 clip, which as you can see, if you look on the bottom, there's only 1 clip that we got to remove, and then you can go ahead and get this piece removed. All right, next we're going to remove these 2 brackets here. There's 1 on each side, and there's only 2 bolts holding each of them down. We're going to remove the horn, and to do that we got to pull up on this clip to get access to the bolt. Now we're going to go ahead and remove the bolt, and then we're just going to disconnect the harness and then completely remove the horn and set it aside for now. We're going to have to drain the coolant, so we're going to go ahead and take off our cap. Set that aside for now. You're gonna need a plastic container, and we're gonna go towards the passenger side on the front to locate the cap that we're gonna have to loosen for the coolant to drain out. You're gonna turn this counterclockwise until you see the coolant start coming out. And go ahead and let all the coolant drain out for now. All right, so once you start seeing just drops come down, you can go ahead and close the cap back up. We got to remove the top bracket on the driver's side radiator. Starting on the left side here, we got these 3 bolts we're gonna have to remove, and then this 4th bolt as well. Okay, so once you remove the top radiator bolts, we got 1 bolt that's holding on the bottom part of the bracket of the radiator that we got to get out the way as well. And if you follow this bracket here, that's holding down the bottom of the radiator, you can see right there the last bolt we got to remove. Okay, so once you remove the last bolt on the bottom, at this point the radiator is just going to hang. We're going to use some pliers to remove these 2 clamps on these 2 hoses on top. All you got to do is pinch the clamp and pull it back, and then remove the hose. But be sure you use the container used earlier for the main radiator, because you might still spill a little bit of radiator coolant, just to prevent any mess. Okay, so once we got the radiator completely removed, like I said earlier, we're gonna go ahead and remove these 2 bolts, because we're gonna have to remove this top bracket, but we could only move around these elbows left and right in whatever direction we need to tilt and slide off this bracket, because we're not gonna remove these. Okay, so once I loosen these, it looks like these are actually stuck onto the bracket, so they don't come off completely, but you could definitely tell that it got removed from the radiator itself. Now, the easiest way that I found to remove this radiator bracket is that you're gonna tilt both of these elbows straight back. Once you've done that, you should be able to easily tilt it off towards the back like so. And now we got that top bracket completely removed. And at that point, you should be left with just the bare radiator. Okay, next we're gonna have to remove this bolt here, as well as this top one here that connects this brace here to the fender support. But in order to remove the top one, you're gonna have to remove it from the top side. Because by looking at it from the bottom side, it looks like a washer that can be removed, but it's actually part of the bracket. Okay, so once we get this brace off, we're gonna put back the factory bolt that was removed from the brace on the top side, and we're gonna put one of the washers and nut that's supplied. So go ahead and put this bolt in there, tighten it from the bottom with the washer and the lock nut installed. So it should look just like this. There's the factory bolt, and on the bottom is gonna be the lock nut and the washer that comes in the ProCharger kit. Now, as far as that brace that we removed earlier goes, doesn't look like we're gonna reinstall that according to the manual. Okay, on the next part, we're gonna go ahead and start working on the crank pulley. But before we start doing that, if you have a manual, it's pretty simple. Just put your car in 6th gear and make sure that your e-brake is on and that the rear tires are touching the ground. If you have an automatic, you're gonna have to follow these following steps. You're gonna have to go underneath the car, locate the round metal access cover for the torque converter. It says to use this flat screwdriver to remove the cover, as you can see in the pictures here. And then you're gonna have to use a pry bar or a large screwdriver to wedge between the torque converter and the housing. And that's just to prevent that the engine turns while we loosen the big main bolt that's holding down this crank pulley. All right, so once you got that done, we're gonna use a 24mm socket and a long breaker bar to get this bolt out. Now, we're not removing the pulley, we're just removing the bolt. All right, so I was finally able to remove the crank pulley bolt. It can be pretty hard to get that bolt removed. What I end up using is this here and this long pipe here, just like the one on my jack right there, to have more than enough leverage and make it as easy as possible to get that bolt removed. And here's a little tip here, guys. Here's the bolt here now. And it's pretty cold today, so it's gonna be a little bit more colder here in the garage. So what I did is I heated up this bolt with the heat gun as much as I could. Not necessarily to heat up the bolt itself, but as you can see, this bolt has some kind of sealer here. And all I did was have it on there long enough to get this sealer melted a little bit. And I did have to put a lot of force, but I was able to get this thing out. And of course, you don't have much room to use a heat gun in there, but I had my small one that I usually use for wiring, and I was able to angle it right towards the head of the bolt. So I just want to share that tip there, guys. It worked very well for me, and it'll definitely save you a couple of hours stressing with that bolt down there. All right, so the very next thing we have to do is we're gonna have to use some pliers to get this clip out and get this radiator loose from the radiator fan itself. Once we do that, we're just gonna push this down and get it out of the way. And that should give us enough room to put the new crank pulley on here that ProCharger supplies you with. All right, so I got my hose loosened, able to push this down a little bit more. The next hose you want to loosen is going to be this one here. It's just a coolant hose that runs to the radiator we removed earlier on the driver's side. Go ahead and use some pliers again. Take these tabs off, one here, one on the bottom, and then we're simply just gonna get this hose and leave it held up right here on the passenger side for now. All right, so next we're gonna go ahead and grab our crank pulley that's supplied by ProCharger, along with these 6 bolts and these 6 looking lobes that come with the kit. We are gonna need a little bit of some gasket maker just to put on the bead on the outside of this ring here. We are gonna need to use some Loctite to put on these 6 bolts. So the first thing we're gonna do is remove the bolt from all 6 of the cam lock assemblies. Once you've done that, we're gonna go ahead and insert our bolt from the inside and have the lobe stick out on the outside just like that. And then we're gonna go ahead and retighten the bolt to the cam lobe itself. But be sure you put a little bit of thread locker on the very end of the bolt. Okay, so once you've done that, it should look just like this. And I do want to mention that it does say in the manual that these lobes need to be facing each other. So as you see here, this lobe right here is facing this lobe, and this lobe is facing that lobe, and so on and so on. And the reason why they want you to do that is because this is going to make it a lot easier to be able to install this onto the stock pulley on the Camaro. And just be sure that these are hand tight, not tight all the way just yet. We're gonna do that once it's installed into the vehicle along with the main bolt. And as you can see here, I have sealer only on the outer side of this circle here in the center. All right, so now we're about to install this onto the car. The manual states to also put silicone on the bottom of the head bolt and on the washer as well when installing the new crank bolt that ProCharger sends you. Okay, so once you got the ProCharger crank pulley on, you don't want to tighten the main bolt just yet. We're gonna have to loosen all 6 of those bolts that are tied onto the lock cams, one turn counterclockwise, because once you've done that, we're gonna rotate this all the way to the left as much as we can, and then retighten all 6 of those bolts. All right, so once you tighten all 6 of those bolts, then you're gonna go ahead and completely tighten up the main center crank pulley bolt to 240 foot-pounds. Now, I don't have a torque wrench that's set up to be that high. So what I used is the same tools that I used to remove the bolt the first time, as tight as possible. So now we gotta fix the radiator hose. Now remember, that plastic clip that was once all the way to the right here, as you can see the markings, we're gonna move it all the way to the passenger side like I already have it. ProCharger sends you zip tie to be able to zip tie this to the plastic cover of the fan. Just be sure that that zip tie does not touch the fan. And what I did, just to be safe, I added a zip tie on the right side and even another one on the very left right here, just to play it safe. And the only purpose of zip tying this is to prevent it touching this pulley. Okay, so now we got to change the AC bracket. ProCharger sends you a much shorter one because it looks like we're gonna have to get this AC line tucked down more for the ProCharger itself can sit on top. We're gonna have to take off this tab here that's holding this line down. You could use some pliers like we have been doing. And also the other side, as you can see, there's a harness with the same kind of tab. Just use the pliers on that as well. And then we just got to remove this nut and then we'll install the new one. And just to give you an idea what the new one looks like, again, it's a lot shorter. You're gonna have the new strap that's gonna hold the AC line and just the bolt. And you're gonna use the factory spot that the stock bracket's currently on. So as you can see now, I now have the bracket that ProCharger supplies. And it doesn't really tell me where to leave this line at or the harness that we disconnected, but I'm just gonna get it tucked in back there for now. And as far as this one goes, it doesn't look like it's gonna harm anything. But if for some reason I find it in the way later, then I'll just move it around. And you do have to push it down a little bit, but it shouldn't be a lot of force to where you're gonna damage the AC line. All right, next, it looks like we're gonna have to move this harness here by removing this bolt here, because we're finally gonna put the bracket that holds the ProCharger itself. All right, so the first thing we gotta do on the bracket is we gotta remove this idler pulley because there's 2 bolts that we have to insert through the bracket to connect it to the engine. So I'm gonna go ahead and remove this bolt here and I'll show you what that looks like. All right, so here's the pulley we removed. Just be careful when taking it apart because there's some pieces that might fall out. And once you remove the pulley, now you have access to the hose you need to get to insert the bolts and the spacers that need to be tightened to the engine. Okay, so these are the 4 main bolts that are gonna attach this bracket onto the engine. You got this little one here, you got these 3 here, but as you can see, one of them is smaller than the other 2. And I'll show you exactly where that one goes. Okay, as you can see, we finally got the bracket on. And just to let you know, the smaller bolt out of the 3 goes right here on top. The other 2 are gonna sit on the bottom, and the one short bolt bolts up right here into the block. Now at this point, we can go ahead and put this harness back on with the bolt you originally took it off with. And then once you've done that, you can go ahead and put the idler pulley back on where it was before. Also, I do want to mention that the manual doesn't say anything about using Loctite on these bolts, but I just put about 2 drops on each of those 4 bolts just to play it safe because I don't want anything coming loose. Okay, so I ran into a little bit of a problem. ProCharger they sent me was actually the wrong ProCharger for this bracket. So I've already contacted ProCharger and I got to send the ProCharger first for I can get the correct one back. So at this point, I'm gonna have to put the ProCharger part last, and I'm gonna go ahead and continue doing as much as I can while I wait on the new ProCharger. All right, moving on next, we're gonna have to remove this bracket here, held down by this bolt here, and we're gonna do the exact same thing on the passenger side. All right, so once you disconnected both of those bolts, the radiator for the transmission lines is gonna be hanging. You're gonna wanna disconnect this little clip here. All I used was a flathead screwdriver to open it up to get it disconnected from this transmission line. And on the left side, you're gonna have to disconnect this sensor here that's still attached to this cover. All right, looks like the next part we're gonna be removing these covers on both driver's side and passenger side, and it should be held down by some plastic tabs and as well as some metal ones. You should be able to get those off with a flathead screwdriver, and once I get them off, I'll show you the metal tabs that I'm talking about. I end up having to remove the same covers removed on the driver's side from the passenger side to get a way better access on these last 2 metal clips, one there and the one on top, because there's pretty much no way with those covers being in the way to even get close to them. You're gonna have to remove these little clips that are holding the transmission line down, and also I already removed this one. This one was also connected right here on the plastic part, and then at that point we should be able to get this plastic piece out. And on the driver's side, I do have to do some cutting in order to get that one off because it actually wraps around the AC line. Okay, so I finally got the driver's side out, and this side is gonna be really complicated. I couldn't really find the easiest way to do this, but on the bottom side of the plastic, I basically had to tear it all off, at least up to here, because it wraps around this AC line right here. And even when I broke off everything on the bottom side, you don't really have much room to get the plastic piece out of here, but even then I had to pull this way because of those tabs there. There's 4 of them in total, which that's where you remove the metal clips from. You got to push it to the right and then pull out, and you should be able to pull it up from the top. As you can see, there's the spot where I was telling you about that I pretty much have to break off from the bottom. And here's the passenger side. You shouldn't have to break anything off. There's also going to be the 4 metal tabs you're going to have to remove from this side as well. Next, we're going to remove this bracket that's still connected to the transmission cooling radiator. We're going to be removing these 2 bolts, and then we're going to be putting on the new bracket that comes in your ProCharger kit. Okay, so here's the old bracket here that we're no longer going to use. And here's the new bracket we're going to be using that comes with the kit. The only main real difference I see here, it's only going to be held by 1 bolt now instead of 2, which by the way, this bolt here should also be supplied in your kit. We're just going to let it hang for now and we'll move on to the next step. Okay, now we're going to have to disconnect any of these plastic clips that are holding the harness on this support here, because then we're going to have to remove this entire support. That is held down by 4 bolts on each side. Okay, so moving along to the brackets of the intercooler, you should have 2 that come with your kit, along with 4 of these bolts here. You're just gonna leave them loose on both sides for now, where you could be able to adjust it once you put that support beam back on. And the brackets are gonna sit right in between here. It's gonna use the exact same 4 hose that you have to remove the 4 bolts on each side of the support bar. Now, I couldn't find anywhere on the manual where it says to remove this piece, but I'm gonna have to remove this piece because I have the stage 2 intercooler, and the silicone piping is gonna have to go to this spot here. It's not a big deal to me. I don't mind removing this and not putting it back on. So just keep that in mind. If you have the stage 2 intercooler, you're gonna have to remove that plastic little piece on the driver's side. Okay, now we can go ahead and tighten our 2 bolts that bolt the bracket to the intercooler itself. Do the same thing on the passenger side, and just be sure you have enough room to put your tubing on here because the AC line is pretty close. Okay, so once you install your intercooler, it should look like this. Just be sure when putting the intercooler in that you have your harness on top and not get it kinked in the back. Also be sure when you put these 4 bolts back in that you put them as close as you can back to where they were. And what I mean by that, if you see my passenger side here, you can see that it's slightly off on the top on both of these bolts. I think I'm pretty much gonna be fine on that, but just be sure you try to put those as close as you can exactly how they were. Next, you're gonna be putting the tubing on, and you're gonna start off with this small one here and the clamps on both sides. And then you got this long tubing here, which you're going to put this tubing from the bottom of the car going to the top. Now you might have some issues here because it's kind of close to the AC line, but what I did to make this easy is I put a screwdriver right here and not put too much pressure, but I pried back on the intercooler to be able to slide this elbow along with this bracket here. And that pretty much took care of that. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and install both brackets back onto the car. The right side is just gonna be exactly how you removed it, just the 2 bolts. But on the left side, we're gonna have to move some things around because the horn will no longer go on the factory spot. What you're gonna have to do is the 2 10mm bolts that bolt on the both horns to the bracket itself, you're gonna have to remove those bolts completely and then just simply swap the horns and then have the horns towards each other, aiming towards the back of the car to be able to put the horn back on. And I thought we would be able to put this harness back where it was, but because of the horn being pushed back so far to the left, this harness won't allow you to connect the horn back if you try to put it back to its original spot. And what you want to do when you're putting this bracket on is leave the horns loose temporarily, so once this bracket is on, you're still able to move these around to where you need them to be, facing towards the back, tighten the bracket, and then you can go ahead and tighten the 2 horns back up. All right, so the next thing we got to work on is the brake pump. We're gonna have to disconnect both vacuum lines. This one here, there's another one in the back that you can't see yet, but we're gonna have to remove these 2 bolts anyway, so at that point I'll be able to disconnect the vacuum line that's towards the back. Okay, so once you get it loose, we're gonna have to get the top bracket off, and as you can see there, we got 2 tabs, one on the left side and one holding this harness here that we're gonna have to remove. Also in the back, don't pull very hard once you get the bolts off this bracket to get the bracket off the car, because it's actually holding onto that line there. So be sure you remove that too. And when pulling this bracket off, be sure you tilt up and then back. As you can see there, it's got a hook that hooks onto the frame. So it's not as simple as just pulling back. You got to pull up and then back. Okay, so once you remove the stock bracket on the brake pump, you're gonna have to put the bracket that ProCharger sends you along with another bracket we're about to put on right now. Just be sure those 2 holes on the bracket face opposite of where the big vacuum hose goes. All right, so once you put the bigger bracket on, it should look just like this. As you can see, the little bracket on the bottom and the top bracket on top. Now this new piece will be bolting down on the bottom of that piece there. The other thing is we're gonna have to pull on this wire harness to get it out of the way. And now we're gonna use those 2 bolts. Then you're gonna use 2 more nuts to tighten this to the bottom of that now. Okay, so once you get the brake pump back bolted onto the car, go ahead and connect your harness and be very gentle with this vacuum line. It is possible to connect it this way. You just gotta be real careful because this vacuum line is really stiff and you don't wanna damage it. Remember, before we removed it, it was facing towards the front, but now it's facing towards the back. So you're just gonna have to angle this line as best as possible to be able to connect right back to its fitting. And the front vacuum line is pretty easy to put back on. You're not gonna have any issues on that. Now I went ahead and tightened these two brackets here because the next step is gonna involve putting the driver's side radiator back on, and I don't wanna take a chance of not being able to tighten those two bolts anymore. All right, so on this next part, when putting the radiator back on, it is gonna be a little bit of a pain. You're gonna have to put this hose back on and you don't really have that much room. Now the hose you will be connecting to the right side of the radiator needs to be the one coming from this T-bracket on the main radiator hose. And I haven't got this one connected yet because we're gonna have to use some special fittings to be able to extend the radiator hose for this side. But on the bottom of the radiator, you're gonna have to install the bottom bracket, which should be supplied with 2 bolts from the ProCharger kit. Now I ended up using the factory ones because I completely forgot to look at the kit. So be sure when you install yours, you use the ones from the kit. Also supplied in the kit are 2 screws. Make sure you use those 2 screws to mount the top of the radiator onto this bracket. Be sure not to over tighten these because again, this is plastic and once you strip it, you're not going to be able to use them anymore. The other thing that I don't really like, but I don't think it's going to be that big of an issue, is this elbows touching against the radiator. If anything, towards the end, I'll see if I can zip tie that tube closer to the engine. Therefore, this piece right here can be more away from the radiator. All right, so as far as the other hose goes, as you can see here, coming down, going a little bit up, and it stops right there. Now this hose is the one that's supplied in the kit. It's made really long, but it's designed for you to cut to where you need it to. And as you can see there, the other side is the factory hose that comes from the long pipe that comes across from the passenger side. So you're just gonna put that brass fitting on both of these hoses and these 2 clamps that are also supplied in the kit to clamp down to each other. All right, just a heads up, on this hose here, be sure you don't route it the way I did. It actually has to come from on top of this bracket onto here, because if you don't, when it comes to putting on the bumper, the back of the LED fog lights on the bumper are gonna smash this against this bracket here and it's not gonna allow you to put the bumper on. Okay, so when setting up this coolant line here, I only zip tied it to the AC line because that's what it looks like on the picture on the manual, and I went ahead and zip tied this part to the plastic piece on the fan, therefore it doesn't move around or anything. And after you've done all that, the manual states to go ahead and fill it up with coolant, which I don't have yet, so I'm gonna skip that step for now. But the next step it does tell you to do is go ahead and reinstall the driver's side headlight. Okay, so it turns out that I have to wait on the headlight because I'm not gonna be able to put the big tubing that leads to the throttle body. So we're gonna wait on that for now. But the next piece you're gonna have to put back on is this piece here. Now on the manual, it says that they send you a custom one in their kit, but I did not find that on the kit that I bought. So what I ended up doing is just cutting it here, therefore it gave me enough access to bolt it back up to the front support bar. Now I'm noticing now that I have it on, I might have to trim it a little bit more for the tubing for the bypass valve. That's gonna go that way. Also, don't forget on your left side, go ahead and connect your sensor back on. Make sure it's locked and you're good to go on that. All right, so I got the bypass valve already connected, and it turns out that I was right. I did have to trim this up a little bit more to be able to get this tubing the way it is. I did add this zip tie here. It doesn't say to add that. I did that myself because I didn't want this hanging too much. But once you connect this hose here, you can go ahead and connect your bypass valve and your filter at the end, and then you can tighten all those clamps. All right, so the next part you gotta do is put this black piece here with all the brass fittings, as you can see. And on the bottom, you can see that I already attached the vacuum hose that goes all the way down to the bypass valve. It does say use these hoses that the kit comes with and clamp them onto the intake. But what I did, because I like these fittings a lot better, all I did was cut the stock hosing that goes out and down to the bottom and just use the tips. I find it a lot easier if I ever have to disconnect those versus having these clamps all the way in there, and it's gonna be a lot harder to get to. Now again, this is not part of the instructions. I decided to do this on my own just to make it a lot easier for me. As far as that vacuum line goes, as you can see, it goes straight down. I have it zip tied here, not tightly because it is a vacuum hose, because you don't want to pinch it or kink it. And as you can see, it goes further down on the bottom of the AC line with 2 more zip ties just to make sure it doesn't move around. Got it coming out and then connected to the bypass valve. Okay, next I'm gonna go ahead and work on the bumper part. Gonna have to remove the LED fog light temporarily just to get this vent out. We're gonna fully remove the vent and then reinstall this fog light back on. It's only being held down by 3 bolts, 1 here, 1 on top, and 1 on the right. And we're gonna have to disconnect any wiring clips that are still connected to the vent. You got 1 on the right, 1 here on the left, and 1 on the bottom. All right, so I finally got the ProCharger back. We got to start off by removing this bolt here, only if you decide to install the oil drain line that will be running all the way down to the bottom of the car for easier access to change the oil on the ProCharger. Now, if you don't want to use that, you can just leave this drain plug here, and when the time comes to change the oil out, just simply remove this bolt and all the oil will come out. But I don't want to go that route because it looks a lot harder when the ProCharger is already installed and the AC line is already kind of close to it. This method seems to make it a lot easier. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this bolt and then install the oil drain line. This oil drain line already comes with this piece here at the very end. However, on the manual, it does not tell you that you're going to have to remove this piece and then install the elbow first and then reinstall the piece that it came with. So I just want to give out a tip out there, guys, in case you get a little confused on that. And then you can move on forward to putting it on the ProCharger. All right, so once you install the oil drain line, just be sure that you aim it towards the right, basically towards the pulley side. Next, it's best to go ahead and fill up the ProCharger with the correct oil that ProCharger sends in the kit. And this is where the dipstick is going to be located. And also, this is the same spot where you put the oil in. Now, once you've done all this, at that point, you're going to go ahead and install it on the bracket, along with the bolts that bolt the ProCharger onto the bracket. Okay, so as you can see, I got the ProCharger on the bracket now. And there is one bolt that's a little hard to put on because the tensioner's in the way. But I find it a lot easier is if you install the belt after you install all the other bolts. Leave this one last. You have just enough room to now install that last bolt. And the way I started wrapping the belt, I wrapped the main pulley first, and then onto the idler pulley, and then obviously last the ProCharger pulley. And you're just gonna use a ratchet here, stick it in this part here, and you're just then gonna lift up to finish putting on the belt onto the ProCharger. Whatever you do not touch this one. There's no reason for you to touch this side at all. If you do, chances are you're gonna mess up the tensioner. So ignore this one on the left and just only pay attention to this slot on the right. All right, next we're gonna be installing the long tube that goes from the intercooler to the throttle body. And since the airflow will be coming through the long side into the throttle body, you want to make sure that this little opening here on your map sensor is facing towards where the air is coming from. We're going to be installing it just like this. And also there is an arrow here on the bottom of the tube that's letting you know which way the air is going to be traveling. So that would also give you a hint to be ensured that this map sensor is facing towards the air. And in your kit, it should already come with 2 bolts and 2 washers to screw the mass airflow sensor down to the tubing. I'm not too sure if you can use your stock bolts, but I highly recommend you use the bolts that the kit came with because you don't want to strip this. All right, so right before installing this, your kit should come with an extension. Be sure you install the extension on this side before you install this tubing because it's going to be a lot harder once you get this installed to look down under there to get this connected and connected to the harness. All right, got the bracket on that holds down the tube. Also, I zip tied the extension I mentioned earlier just to play it safe that it doesn't touch the belt at all. Also, you want to go ahead and install this tube here that goes to the ProCharger to the long pipe that goes down to the intercooler. Now, I could be wrong, but it seemed like this piece here actually had a slightly longer side. So what I found the easiest way to put this on is the longer side is going to go towards the big tube and the shorter side is going to go towards the ProCharger. And just make sure you tighten this clamp as well that goes to the bottom of the tube we just installed. So now we're going to go ahead and move on to putting on the driver's side headlight. Okay, so I'm pretty much getting to the final part of installing the ProCharger. What you're gonna have to do is remove the bolt that's tying down the AC line to the bracket. There's a stud on here that this bracket sits on and a 10mm nut that ties it down. You're gonna have to remove the nut, pull this bracket all the way off the stud. Be very gentle because this is an AC line and you don't want to damage it. So just be very gentle pulling this towards the mortar to get this bracket fully off and then just put it in front of the stud. And it's okay if this bracket bends because at this point you're not really using it, but it's still going to hold down this vacuum line here. You should be able to push this line closer to the body of the car for it can give you the room to put this tubing that connects to the air filter that we're about to put on now. Also, you want to go ahead and put this hose that your kit comes with that's going to connect to the filter that we're about to put on. This hose does go on one way. This side of the hose, it's actually angled like an L shape. So just be sure the L shape goes towards this area here. And the other end, which is the straight part, goes towards the filter. And here we have the filter here. And as you can see, I got a black dot here because we're gonna have to drill a hole through the plastic just enough to be able to fit this in there. And the other end will connect to the hose that I just showed you earlier. Now be sure you make the hole big enough only for the smaller side, not the bigger side. The smaller side goes in the filter and the bigger side is where the hose is going to connect to. All right, so once you're done drilling the hole on your filter, it should look just like this. Okay, and there we have it. This is how it should look once you're done. You should have 3 clamps on this. One in the front, one in the center, and one in the back. And also a small clamp for the piece we just drilled a hole into the filter that connects to this hose here. So at this point, you want to make sure that the reservoir is full of coolant, because once we turn the engine on, chances are that's going to go a little low again and we're going to have to refill it. So now it's finally time to start this thing and just make sure that there's no leaks or any issues we're going to have once the engine's on. Alright guys, so I finally got it all in one piece. As you can see here, I got the bumper all back put together. Everything fit perfectly fine. You can now see there the intercooler there. Well, all in all, everything has gone great so far. I have not got any check engine lights, no leaks whatsoever. And this is actually my second day already driving it. And I do have to say, it makes a huge difference once you put one of these on. And all in all, I do want to mention the cost of this whole setup. The charger itself cost me around $8,200. And no, I'm not rich. That's what credit cards are for. You do have to spend some money on the coolant, which I think if I remember correctly, I spend around 30 to 40 bucks for 2 gallons. And then of course, you're gonna have to buy the spark plugs that the kit's gonna require you to get, which are NGKs. And that cost me, I wanna say around 100 bucks. So all in all, you're looking at probably around $8,400 for this setup. Just keep in mind that I did put this on myself, so that alone saved me a lot of money. But in my opinion, this kit wasn't really hard to put on. It was just time consuming. And if I may be honest, if it wasn't for recording and the delay on the ProCharger, this probably would have took me a good 8 hours, just like it says on the manual. And that's by myself, not with any help. Of course, if you have more help, you're gonna get there a lot faster, a lot quicker, but you don't really need it. The last thing I do want to mention is the oil drain line for the ProCharger, where I end up putting it, is right there hanging. As you can see, there's a hole on the bottom of the splash shield that I can actually insert that through. And I know you're thinking, why are you going to let it hang out like that? That's actually as far as it will go. And if you're too worried it looks like it hangs too low, it actually doesn't. This cover here on the front of the bumper actually hangs lower, and you still have pretty much a decent amount of space between the drain plug and the ground. This is my second day driving and I haven't seen any issues doing it this way. But that's going to put it into this video, guys. I really hope this helps many people out there if they decide to go ProCharger or this exact same kit. Feel free to leave anything on the comments if you feel like I left something out to help others out there as well as myself. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Hit that like button for me, and I appreciate the support. And like always, don't forget, God loves every single one of you guys. God bless you guys, and we'll see you on the next video.